I always start off videos like this by saying that I believe climate change is a serious problem, and I defer to the scientific community when they say that humans are causing climate change. And there's a very specific reason why I do this. The left is embracing more anti-science rhetoric. In this story, demoted by university for views on gender, Professor Seuss. In fact, it appears he was forced out, they say. Does that mean he was fired? We'll read the story. But I always open these segments because they'll always try to claim, oh, the right is anti-science and things like this. And not here, not on my channel, because I'm moderate, leaning left. I defer to the scientific community. I don't think I know better than they do. And that means even on issues of gender, I'm not going to defer to ideologues. I'm going to defer to scientists, people like Dr. Deborah So, who is much more of an expert than I. While there are certainly arguments to be made in terms of the, I believe it's called bimodal nature of gender and sex, arguments on recognizing a million or infinite genders are where things kind of break down. But let's read this story and we can talk about science. And this person, I believe, he's not just a professor, I believe he's a psychiatrist, but let's see what they have to say. Now, before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. Or just share this story. In fact, just share it regardless because YouTube deranks this kind of content. They're propping up CNN, Fox News. You've heard me say it several times in each podcast, but it's true. So if you like what I have to say, then please share. Otherwise, don't. But let's read. A child psychiatry expert at the University of Louisville is suing the school for forcing him out after he publicly expressed skepticism about transgender ideology, which allows gender-confused young people to select the gender of their choice and which has been rapidly gaining acceptance in the world of medicine. Failing to toe the politically correct line on gender can be costly nowadays. I want to add too, this is from the Epoch Times. A New York human rights law banning so-called gender identity discrimination imposes fines of up to $250,000 for failing to use a person's preferred personal pronoun. That is in an instance of public accommodation. So if you run a restaurant and someone says, from now on, you must refer to me as this, and you don't, you will be fined $250K for willful violations. Now, they have to file with the city. City will investigate, determine if a violation took place. But how strange, I might add. One of the biggest problems with what's happening in New York, kind of as a sidestep, we will revisit this, is that their law says that gender identity is self-expression, meaning you could literally say you're whatever you want and the business has to accommodate you. We'll come back to this. I've talked about it in the past. They go on to mention that social media giant Twitter bans users for misgendering. We get this. I don't want to. Let's get to the story. Professor Alan Josephson, former head of the university's Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Psychology, asserts in a lawsuit initiated in U.S. District Court in Louisville that he was discriminated against, demoted, and effectively fired for his now unfashionable scientific belief that sex is immutable based on objective facts, binary, i.e. male or female, which is chromosomal, and fixed in each person at the moment of conception. Josephson, who publicly opposes transgender ideology, has said children shouldn't be allowed to use bathrooms based on their own self-selected gender identity, and that parents should listen empathetically to their children and then guide them to align with their biological sex. At a Heritage Foundation panel discussion in 2017, Josephson shared his views on gender dysphoria and the medical danger of gender ideology for children, views that until a few years ago had not been regarded as controversial. University officials reacted with horror, taking away his department chairmanship and giving him the boot by stating they would not renew his contract of employment despite years of exemplary performance reviews. Now let's get to what's very challenging and disturbing about this. For one, science is often wrong. So even if scientists today say something is true, it doesn't mean it will always be true, and I can respect that. That's why I only tend to defer to the experts, because I'm not a scientist, so I can only really go with what the scientific community thinks, recognizing that science historically has been wrong. That's how it works. We improve our knowledge and move forward. The problem here is that science is being heavily impacted by politics, and people are being fired from their jobs because of politics. Do not believe that the scientific community is immune from this. The same is true for climate change. If somebody works a job and the school receives a grant from a foundation or from an organization, they risk losing that if they don't fall in line with what is considered socially acceptable. Only now, there is a stark divide between what is or isn't socially acceptable, with the center and the right saying this guy should be allowed to express his opinion and talk about these issues, and the left saying no, he's a bigot. But let's talk about New York for a second. Actually, no. We'll get to New York. Let's read a little bit more. According to the legal complaint filed in a case known as Josephson v. Benapudi, Josephson has become concerned that new treatments for children and adolescents experiencing gender dysphoria didn't promote their long-term health interests. He has expressed concerns about a controversial new treatment for youth experiencing gender dysphoria that involves accepting the young person's self-asserted gender identity, prescribing puberty-blocking medications and cross-sex hormones, and ultimately guiding the individual towards various surgeries. Josephson had consulted previously with Alliance Defending Freedom, his lawyers in the new lawsuit, in cases, quote, involving youth experiencing gender dysphoria who demanded to use the showers, restrooms, and locker rooms opposite to their biological sex in the public schools. He also served as an expert witness in federal litigation in 2016 over North Carolina's birth-sex bathroom law. A Christian legal interest group, the Alliance Defending Freedom, is based in Scottsdale, Arizona. ADF says it was created to defend religious liberties from the ACLU and its allies, which have used the courts to drive out public expressions of faith and to radically change America into something the Founding Fathers never intended. In a recent interview with National Review, Josephson expressed worry that political pressure, which led the WHO to remove gender dysphoria from its catalog of mental disorders, could cause the publishers of the DSM, the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, to delist the illness. We are very close to that now, Josephson told the National Review. There are now over 50 gender clinics in the U.S. These were unheard of 7 or 8 years ago, and they're set up almost like a restaurant where a person comes in and orders a treatment. Doctors have always said, you give me the symptoms and I'll help you with what I think is going on for the diagnosis. But that basic process is being short-circuited by this is my diagnosis, this is what I have approach. And literally, they're asking for hormones, and amazingly, doctors are going along with it in many cases. Here's the important, there's an important bit here. If the DSM delists gender dysphoria, that means trans people will not be able to get treatment in many circumstances because gender dysphoria would not be considered a mental illness. And if that happens, when they go to a doctor, the doctor can't give you a medication unless you have some kind of ailment. If it's removed, they won't be able to get it. But let's talk now about New York City a little bit, because I always try to keep these segments a little bit short. There's a lot to go through. In New York City, they recognize, I believe it's 32 genders. And here's the important thing. The civil rights law in New York says that gender identity is part of self-expression, that basically they define gender as self-expression, which means you can put on a cape and call yourselves vampire gender. Now, I've talked to many lawyers about this, and what I was told is basically, will it pass the laugh test? That means if you go to court and claim you're vampire gender, can the court throw you out and laugh at you and say, you're not? Now, here's where it gets tricky. If a court can determine who is or isn't actually of a particular gender and laugh at someone out of a courtroom, then why can't a conservative judge tell a trans person they're not trans? Therein lies the problem with this. It is completely exploitable, and there is no clear set path towards actually protecting the trans community. The law as it stands will allow someone to claim their, cement gender and then walk around carrying bricks or something weird that makes no sense. And you can go into a restaurant and demand to use the brick bathroom. And if they don't have one, you can claim that's not fair. Now, things get even more strange. I went to a restaurant and I asked them about laws. It was a new restaurant in New York City. This was several months ago. And according to the law, they have to be able to accommodate all genders. I believe, I could be wrong, but my understanding was they did. So new buildings, new restaurants typically have unisex bathrooms, or they'll say something like all gender restroom. Well, I asked, do they have a no gender restroom? Because agender is recognized in New York as well. A bathroom that says all genders is not a bathroom for no genders. In which case, could you sue? And if you can't, because the courts would laugh at you, why does the court have a right to determine what is or isn't a gender if the law makes it clear your self-expression, you can be whatever gender you want? Therein lies the problem. I think we will eventually see a case in New York where someone claims to be like hydrogender or one of these weird Tumblr genders, and someone will tell them to leave, We can't accommodate that. Someone can say like, oh, let me tell you a funny story. It's actually, I believe it was Joe Rogan podcast where he brought this up, that furries went to a hotel and demanded litter boxes. Okay, well, technically, I understand it seems like a stretch, but in New York, you could claim that as, a furry gender, you need a litter box to use, and it's discrimination if they don't provide it. And if a court can tell you that's silly and no, why can't they also tell that to a trans person? This is dangerous precedence. And the reason I think it's important to highlight is that I, for one, think we should be protecting trans people. I believe civil rights are paramount, and we can do these things in sane, logical ways that help keep people safe, legitimately. Think about the law as it stands today. If they say we recognize literally every gender, well, then you end up with these problems where someone could create the possibility that a court could reject an actual trans person's claim that they were discriminated against because they can't legally protect, furry gender or something. It's actually really simple. They need only define transgender as someone who doesn't conform to how they were assigned at birth. In which case, if the courts recognize two biological sexes, then trans people are protected. But what they're doing now is this very open and vague, broad terminology that can result in an actual breakdown. So, as I've explained before, the more you try to protect everybody, the more you actually lose protections for everybody. But I'll leave it there. The university hasn't commented. I guess the point is the suit is happening. There's not really much outside of this. It's not the first time we've heard a story like this, but it's not the last time we'll hear it either. So it is what it is. Leave your comments. Let me know what you think. I certainly believe this professor shouldn't be removed for having professorial beliefs, being an academic and holding views in the scientific community. But hey, man, this stuff keeps getting, it's escalating. Let me know what you think. More stories to come in a few minutes, and I will see you all in the next segment.